Says you all undoubtedly recall there was that horrific explosion at Ahli Hospital in Gaza, which killed some huge number of civilians. We still don't know exactly the toll. Numbers could be as high as 500. I've seen as low as 100, but a huge number of people. And there have been a lot of disputes over exactly what happened here. Was it Israel's fault? Was it a Palestinian rocket that misfired? Both Israeli and U.S. intelligence came down on the side of it was an Islamic Jihad rocket which exploded midair and fell and landed in the hospital courtyard, igniting this blast explosion that killed all of these people. One of the key things that they based this assessment on was this particular video from the Al Jazeera live coverage that evening. Okay, so we have a new development in the investigation into whatever the hell actually happened here, coming from the New York Times, directly disputing the analysis of both Israeli intelligence and critically U.S. intelligence of what this video actually shows. Let's put this up on the screen. So this is from journalist Eric Toller. He says Israeli and U.S. intelligence officials believe that a projectile captured on videos shortly before the Ali Arab Hospital explosion was a Palestinian rocket. New York Times visual investigations found that this object was actually launched from Israel and likely unrelated to the deadly blast. He goes on, I want to bring you all of this analysis here so that you can, have all of the details. So he goes on to say that an IDF spokesperson went on CNN and the BBC with a printed out screenshot from an Al Jazeera live stream showing this projectile, claiming it was the rocket that hit the hospital. We also believe that American officials are incorrectly assessing this to be a Palestinian rocket, and U.S. officials did confirm to them that they believe that this was a rocket, and they used this in their assessment. We geolocated 5 videos that showed this projectile launch from the north, south, east, and west. By drawing lines of perspective, 3 of which can be seen here, we assessed that this project was launched from near the Israeli city of Nahal Oz. We cannot say with confidence what exactly the projectile actually is, but we know that there is at least one Iron Dome launch site in nearly the same location that overlaps from the sight lines we drew from the 5 videos. This site was still present in satellite imagery this year. This projectile may have been launched in reaction to barrages of rockets from Gaza. Here is the timeline. 1 Palestinian rocket barrages followed shortly by 2 Israeli projectile launch, 3 17.5 seconds in air before the projectile detonates, 4 explosion at the hospital 7 seconds later. The projectile launch from Israel detonates at least 2 miles away from the hospital, so not very close. And 25 seconds pass from when the final Palestinian rocket was launched in these videos and the hospital explosion. They go on to say the situation in the area around the hospital was chaotic that evening. The Al Jazeera live stream of the scene, plus other videos we reviewed, shows at least 2 large explosions near the hospital in the minute before the deadly blast. And he talks about, and we had discussed before, the fact that this very same hospital had actually been hit by like a warning shell. That part is more or less confirmed. They had also been warned to evacuate in advance of whatever happened with this explosion. One other update here, Le Monde also confirmed, the newspaper, Le Monde also confirmed that the New York Times telling of what this video actually shows. Asked about the Times findings, a spokesman for the Office of the DNI said the Times and American intelligence agencies have different interpretations of the video. So again, basically this video coupled with that, what I think is total BS, alleged conversation between Hamas militants is what Israeli officials in particular were basing their assessment on and what American intelligence was largely basing their assessment on as far as we know based on what they've said publicly. So the New York Times directly disputing their analysis of this video.
What I think is interesting is that they're saying, and this actually explains a lot, because everyone was like, well, if it was Israel, then it would have had to be a JDAM, it would have had to be a bomb. And if it was a bomb, then it would have caused a ton more damage in the hospital, because it didn't end up in the hospital, it hit the parking lot. And then a lot of the scorch marks that were on top of it, everyone was like, well, that's consistent with a rocket and with something that is fueled in particular by, it basically has fuel and it gets on fire and it like sprays everywhere. According to their analysis, if it was then an Iron Dome interceptor, what was it intercepting? They say a possible answer is that by the IDF's own admission, there was a rocket incoming to Nahal Nahal al-Az and Saad at the exact moment of this projectile launch, which would then strengthen their theory now that this was actually an Iron Dome missile. And the thing is that, again, for anybody who doesn't even know, Iron Dome is the Israeli system which shoots down incoming, or intercepts more importantly, incoming rockets like with their own missiles that were fired. There's a lot of software and technology that goes into that. The point though is that that could be, again, could be consistent. I guess the big question though is why did Hamas just scrub everything in the parking lot the day afterwards? They never released any of the photos. They were like, no, it's an Israeli strike. And remember, even their story was that it wasn't an Iron Dome interceptor. They blamed the Israeli airstrike. They specifically said airstrike. So the confounding variable is the parking lot itself, Hamas's sketchiness, and their immediate lies about the death toll, at least on an immediate basis. There's just no way they could have decided at that time, they're like, oh, 500 people died. And you just know that, 30 minutes after the strike? That's impossible. So anyway.
Independent estimates, which again, journalists can't get into Gaza to verify, but are that hundreds were killed, but probably not the 500 that the health ministry originally said. We still don't know exactly what the death toll was. And we still don't have any definitive proof of what happened here. The New York Times investigation is basically saying this video that Israel and that the US were pointing to, again, as really like the bedrock piece of their evidence, doesn't actually show anything that had anything to do with this hospital. Because based on, first of all, it came from Israel. Second of all, it was 2 miles away from the hospital. And the timing doesn't exactly match up either. So they're not saying like, we know what happened, but they are saying there were Israeli airstrikes right in the vicinity of the hospital at the same time. The Israelis say, oh, but it wasn't close enough to damage the hospital. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. And they're saying this thing that the intelligence agencies are basing their assessment on doesn't show what they're purporting it to, that they say that it showed. I think on the other side, what you point to is maybe the most critical piece against Hamas's version of the story, which is like, okay, well, where's your evidence?
Yeah, take a picture of the damn rocket with Hebrew on it and then send it to the world.
And I think it's important to say, like, there are other things that Israel could have used to bomb the site other than JDAM.
Sure.
Right? And which would have a smaller footprint and be more consistent with the type of crater that appears to have been, in this parking lot, in this courtyard after the strike. But it's, number one, I think it's just, adds to the level of uncertainty. It certainly calls into question the Israeli, as I've never had any confidence that the Israelis or the American intelligence agencies would tell us the truth about what was going on here. They desperately needed at that time some evidence to say it wasn't us. Because remember, the context of this was, number one, mass protests instantly break out. Number two, Biden literally visiting Israel that morning. And he needed some kind of face saving, something he could say and point to. So there was a real effort to muster this quote unquote evidence so that he could point to and say, oh, no, it was the other team in his words. And New York Times and other news outlets, I would say at this point, really calling that into question.
Yeah, the reason why it's just so difficult is, immediately came to mind, I'm like, okay, I don't trust what Hamas says. Okay. Then it was like, all right, well, then this evidence comes out. And then for me, I didn't even care about the phone call. For me, it was the parking lot photo. I'm like, okay, well, the parking lot photo is period. Like, it's not an airstrike. So then it doesn't seem like there could have been an alternative explanation. But now there is an alternative explanation that considers it. And you're not wrong. I mean, don't forget, the Times actually is the one who debunked the original story about the U.S. airstrike on supposedly against the ISIS ringleader, which ended up killing like some random civilian and his kids in Afghanistan. If you'll remember that airstrike, the water salesman or whatever. It was actually a New York Times visual investigation that completely debunked that. So anyway, look, I don't know. And what's even more of a plot twist is the guy who's behind this, he used to work for Bellingcat, which is like ties to the CIA. So I'm like, I don't know, man. I mean, it's like, one case, the CIA says, no, it was Israel. Now he's departing, but now he works for the New York Times. He's like, no, actually, it might have been Israel. I have truly no clue. I'm just going to come on the side of we probably won't know. And it also just comes back to the side of why don't we let journalists into Gaza? Because when you do, that's a hell of a lot easier. Somebody can go and bring an actual camera and maybe even a news crew to this hospital and look around moments after the strike and be like, all right, what's that? What's that on the ground? It's simple. When otherwise we're constantly relying on all of this. Although honestly, at this point, the damage is done in both ways. It is just a great highlight of like, you got to be careful with what the information that is coming out here, and that pretty much every party who's involved, from the U.S. press to the U.S. intelligence community to the Israeli military to Hamas, has all had a proven track record of lying in the past, which makes it so difficult to actually even figure out what's happening.
Correct. One thing I will say, just to wrap up this story, is there have been 62 different health facilities just in this engagement that have been bombed during this quote-unquote war against Hamas. So, what happened at this hospital, given the level of carnage, is obviously incredibly significant. There should be an independent investigation. By the way, the U.S. is opposed to an independent investigation, which is another red flag in terms of their story and, what they want the world to believe, just as it's a red flag on the Hamas side that they won't muster their own proof and their own evidence, et cetera. But why would you be opposed to an independent investigation? Anyway, there should be one. We should know what happens here. But of course, it doesn't erase the massive widespread damage and civilian casualties that we are seeing throughout Gaza, regardless of what happened in the specific incidents of this hospital. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.